Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have Mariah Morris, who is a innovation and special projects coordinator for Moore County Schools in North Carolina. So Mariah and I met a little while ago when we were both ambassadors for the North Carolina Computer Science Initiative to get more women in STEM. She was teaching second grade and was just beginning her reign as NC Teacher of the Year. So she's had an amazing year traveling around North Carolina and learning about all the innovative things their schools are doing. And now, as we embark on a very unique year for schooling, I thought it would be wonderful for all of us to get some insights from the professional perspective in terms of a teacher who's taught classroom and then also that's now really leading innovation within her district and her county to help us think through some of the things that we're already thinking about in terms of how we make learning work this next school year. Thank you for joining us, Mariah.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, okay, so I think first things first, we just need to understand, what does it feel like right now to be a teacher? I think we talk a lot about the pressure and the stress for parents, but for just a minute, take us into your world and what it's feeling like right now as we go into this strange year for learning.
Sure, thank you for asking that question and wanting to understand the perspective of the teacher, because teachers are going through a lot of change and a lot of transition right now. Many of our teachers, they are very concerned with how they are going to establish their bond with their students in this remote platform. So teachers thrive on the connection with their students and the relationships they have with all of their children in their classroom. And they're looking at beginning this school year in a very new, unprecedented way. And a lot of the questions that are circulating around teachers are, how are we going to connect? What are we going to do to bond with our students? How are we going to form that social emotional connection that has to happen before any learning can take place? So I think that's a really big question that teachers are thinking about right now.
Right. I think a lot of parents are thinking, in the spring, this was all sprung on all of us. So it was a mess on all counts. And, we all struggled and we made it work. And now, as we go into the school year, we've had a little bit of time. And I think most of us were hoping that this virus was going to be gone and, we would be back to normal. And that didn't happen. But, from a teacher's perspective, what are some of the things you think most teachers have been doing over the summer preparing for the possibility that we are now facing that we'll continue to remote learn?
Yeah, that's another good question. So as the North Carolina Teacher of the Year, I had the privilege of getting to know teachers from across the state, which was such an amazing opportunity to hear what they were doing over the summer in preparation for this school year, not just in my own district, but truly from Ocracoke to Cherokee County in the mountains. And it's phenomenal what teachers have been doing. Teachers have been doing countless hours of virtual PD. Not being paid at all because they're hungry to learn more about how to transition to remote learning. There have been so many workshops offered, workshops through the Friday Institute, workshops through DPI, webinars. All different organizations have opened up their remote platforms to host teachers, and teachers are hungry to learn more. An example is last week, there was a robust equity series put on by the Friday Institute, and thousands of teachers from across the state were connecting to learn more. And so it's really, really phenomenal how teachers have taken this opportunity over the summer, our supposed downtime, and really trying to grow themselves professionally so that they can do a better job next year. And then the other thing is they have physically been preparing their spaces. We've had pop-up classrooms spring up in living rooms and kitchen nooks, and teachers have really been trying to transform a space in their house so that when their students log on, they can see some resemblance of a classroom. And so I think that's going to be really positive as well.
That's interesting. You see, that's one of the things I wouldn't think about is that makes sense that you would want to kind of make your space look like a classroom for
That's
you,
right.
which is amazing that teachers are already thinking about that. One thing you said is a lot of the PD that the teachers are taking their time to do is not paid, which is striking to me, considering that this is such a big change that we all have to make, especially with education. I would assume that there was a ton of funding just pouring into teachers learning and getting up to speed on technology and all that. And there's like a more coordinated effort to like, it's work training to me. Is PD typically paid for teachers?
It just depends on the situation. A lot of districts have professional development days built into our school year calendar, and those are paid. So an example is, let's see, I think it's in 2 weeks, our teachers will come back to school in Moore County schools, and it's a week of professional development, and that's paid. Or once a month, we'll have early release days, and those afternoons are professional development days, and that's paid.
Okay.
However, anything outside of school hours is not paid. And so the things that were happening over the summertime, teachers are 10-month employees. So that was all because they want to grow themselves as professionals. And it is phenomenal how teachers have poured themselves into it. And I'm just thinking of countless webinars and series that have come about in the last couple months to fill that need to grow them professionally.
That's amazing. So if teachers are already doing all that to kind of prepare for the school year, particularly sacrificing their own free time just to make sure that they're in their best shape for their classroom, what can parents be doing? What can we be sacrificing our time to prep for before the school year officially starts?
Well, yeah, I appreciate that question. There's a few things. I think one is watch your attitude toward virtual schooling when your children are in the room with you, and try to have a really positive experience and tone with your children about their learning situation for next year. Because the children, they pick up on it. And if they hear negativity about it being remote learning or blended learning, then that's going to carry through to their attitude towards
such a great insight. Because we're probably not paying attention.
That's right.
The news and you're just like, oh, again.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's the point.
If your child is going back to blended learning, try and play up how cool and fun it is to wear a mask. I know I'm doing that in my own household. I'm telling my children, you get to wear a really cool mask, and you can try and coordinate with your outfits, and we're going to try and let them decorate their masks and whatnot. So try to make it positive and fun, and have just a very optimistic outlook, even if your private conversations behind closed doors are full of more of the adult stresses. Try not to let your children feel those as much. And then I would say the other piece of advice I would have is to communicate with the teacher in advance their preferences for how often they would like you to check in as a parent, because it's really, for the first time ever, education is moving into teacher, parent, child. So we're not sending our children to the school and it's not teacher, child. If the parent is not on board, no learning will happen. For example, a kindergartner is not going to know to get on a Google Hangout unless the parent is on board and alerts them to that. So the parent-teacher connection is vital. And I would communicate with the teacher knowing that if they get an email at 11 p.m. at night, they're going to want to check that email. They're not going to be able to let it sit there. So just be mindful of their work-life balance so that you're respecting their need for mental health breaks as well.
Great. Those are really awesome tips. Now let's take it a little bit further. So some parents are already in hyper planning mode, right? Like, people are planning on creating micro schools. People that have to, both parents are working, or even if they're single parents, they know that they're not going to have the time, just like you said, to be dedicated to make sure they get on the Zoom or the Google Meet or whatever virtual systems need to happen. So if a parent is planning on doing some sort of community schooling or a pod, what are your thoughts on the best way to go about that? And what are some things they should be keeping in mind?
There's a few things. I think one thing is to make sure that the families that you're working with to create a micro school or a pod has the same type of both educational philosophy and COVID philosophy as you do. so that if you are really quarantining and trying to keep it safe at home, that you're lining up with a family who has the same expectations, because that's going to impact what your children do. I'm thinking about field trips or day trips. You need to make sure that your comfort level is the same. And also with your education philosophy. So do you value your students doing more do you value your children doing more like skill-based learning where they're doing drills and learning multiplication facts and getting really solid on the basics? Or do you believe more in inquiry-based, problem-based learning where you want them to have passion projects and they explore organically? So making sure that your expectations for education are the same.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Especially because I think people are just thinking of maybe friends, not necessarily thinking of having that level of conversation in terms of the other extension to that question is the person that might run the micro school, right? It might be one of the parents. I've heard people thinking about hiring a maybe high schooler, but more college students. I'm hearing more college students, or just, going on care.com and finding a nanny. Like, what are some things to think about in terms of who you do hire to manage the micro school?
Yeah, I think that when school districts hire teachers, there are extensive legwork before we let any grown-up in a room with children. And a lot of times I think that parents don't understand a lot of the difficulty that school districts go through. So we're doing background checks, we're doing extensive reference checks, we are talking to former employees, we're doing interviews, sometimes multiple interviews, and there are things we catch that we might not have caught just in an interview. So I would encourage parents to do background checks. I would encourage parents to really reach out to references and really have some good questions for when you do talk to a reference, to talk to that nanny or potential employee about their approach to education and what a typical day would look like for them. Don't lead with the question, but say, okay, you're with us 8 to 5, walk us through a typical day and see what are the first activities that come to their mind. That's probably more likely to be what they do. And then lastly, I would make sure that you feel like this person is a good fit for all of the families involved, because there's so many dynamics with if it's multiple families and a person, to make sure that you really think through all the different personalities.
Okay. Is there, this is kind of a tricky question because our classrooms have one teacher, but a professional with, many students, but do you have any thoughts on ideal size of a pod? How many families it should be limited to if it's going to work well?
Yeah, I think that depends a lot on the ages of the children. And I think that if you have similar age children, all of them are in 3rd grade or all of them are, 1st or 2nd, you can have more because they'll be more on the same level. So I would say, maybe 5 or 6. But if you're having different levels, it's going to be a lot harder. So you probably need smaller numbers.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that I think is really great out of all of this is the strengthening of the parent-child-teacher relationship. Now that just has to be a strong bond, a 3-way bond versus a 2-way and just report back to the parent. It's no, we're all, doing this together on behalf of the child. So in this new format and moving forward, what does good partnership look like between a parent and a teacher?
Yeah, I think you said it. It's a 2-way relationship, and not just the teacher reporting back to the parent, or the parent having a list of things they need to go through with the teacher. It means communicating more often, even if it's in shorter bursts. So traditionally, there would be a parent-teacher conference that would be more lengthy, and you would get into everything in depth right then and there. And then if everything was good, you would have very little contact throughout the year, potentially. But with this remote learning, there's the opportunity to check in more frequently, but also more informally.
Mhm.
And so you are communicating as a parent to the teacher. If your child doesn't understand an actual standard, you know that now.
Yeah.
Whereas before, as a parent, you didn't really understand, okay, you know your child struggled with addition and subtraction, but you didn't know it came down to adding the ones and carrying over. So you understand the minute details a lot better. And as a parent, that empowers you to advocate for your child to the teacher, to specifically say what they need help with. And from the teacher perspective, I think it really shows the power of listening to parents. I'm a firm believer that parents know best. I mean, I'm a mom and I know my children better than any teacher is going to know my child. And so I think that as a teacher, that's a really powerful perspective, that you now know that that parent understands the learning that's going on. They understand the social emotional needs, and you really need to listen to that parent.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think the opportunity to check in more often is actually a great thing, because like you mentioned earlier, a lot of the things that teachers are concerned about is the social emotional learning that's hard to do virtually. And so that, I feel like that's going to fall in the bucket of the parents to really help manage the learning environment being ideal, to really help foster that the child's coming with a great attitude, like you mentioned, really preparing them mentally. So even just that piece of it that used to fall on the teacher to keep the classroom, healthy, that's now on the parent to make sure that that learning environment is healthy.
That's right. You're exactly right.
So a lot of things are going to change and keep changing. And I think we're all at the point that we're accepting that now. One of the great things that in conversation that I'm hearing a lot now is, this is a time to let's just redesign school. Let's take a breather and just think, is this the best way, to do it? And we know that schooling has been in debate for a long time in terms of how do we do things differently? How do we move forward? But nothing has stopped us in its track as this virus has. And now that it has, it really is an opportunity to think, okay, how can we just do this better and keep moving forward? So a lot of the new innovative ideas that are coming out, they're great, but not all of them are, what we would want to just keep forever. So I'm curious, from your perspective, from an innovation standpoint, and from what you've seen, what are some of the new things that are new changes would you like to see stay in terms of what education looks like in the future? And what are some of the ones you're thinking, we're changing this, but we really shouldn't? This is kind of like a core part of, what we do.
So there are about 4 big ones. I'll go through them quickly because this is something I think about often. Social emotional needs. We cannot deny that any longer as a society, that our schools fill a certain social emotional need of our children. Before any learning can happen, we have to pay attention to that. And we really see that with the loss of in-person instruction, how deeply that has affected our children this last spring. And I think a lot of our mourning of not going back to school right now in the fall is really mourning the fact that our children are not going to have those connections between their teachers and peers. And so I think we need to understand that. We need to embrace that. And that needs to be a foundation moving forward. 2 is equity. We have deeply inequitable situations in North Carolina, and this pandemic has exacerbated those inequities in our school systems. We have children who don't have devices at home. We have children who, even if the school gave them a device, do not have internet. We have children who, if the school gave them the device, the hotspot are still so remote that the hotspot can't even pick up a signal. So we're dealing with a public good, internet as a public good, that we need to understand that these inequities in which our children are operating and living in do carry over into their schooling experiences. And that has to be at the forefront of how we understand school. The third thing that I think that we really need to focus on is that of screen time. I'm a huge fan of STEM. I'm a huge fan of women in computer science, but we can't put our children on devices all day long just to have them on a device. And I think that we saw some detrimental aspects of that this spring. And we saw that, yes, children can do things on screens. However, that can't be the primary focus of their K-12 education.
Right.
They can learn about computer science offline,
Yeah.
especially younger. They're going to learn healthier ways of thinking. And so that's an area that I think is really important. And then the last one is how we design our schools. We see the parent's role, we see the child's role, we see the teacher's role as being vitally important. So those three groups have to be involved in school design. Mm-hmm. No longer can we have the top people designing for them.
Yeah.
We have to have school systems that design with them.
Yeah.
And bring in our parents and our students and our teachers in an authentic way to design learner-centered schools.
Yeah. Those are fabulous and really, great things to be thinking about, particularly on the equity point. I know there's been a lot of conversation about how even the thought of doing micro schools, further exacerbates the equity issue, right?
Right.
Those are parents that can afford to pay for a teacher or instructor to do that. And then, of course, if, parents start to do that, then you have less kids, that bring in funding to the school system. So it just goes on and on and on in terms of what the problems are and where we should be focusing on. And I think hopefully we all take this moment to say, okay, let's take this and use all of the brilliant innovation that's happened in the last decade to figure out a new way, a new equitable way. And to your point, yes, it can't just be that our kids are going to be on screens every day. And I think we are more innovative than that in our society.
That's right.
Come up with that. So, well, thank you so much, Mariah.
Thank you.
So insightful, even for me as I'm listening to you. So I already know that our audience is going to enjoy hearing your thoughts on this topic.
Well, thank you. We can do it. We're all in this together.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much. And
thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.